أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Brothers and sisters, welcome to another one of our Mizan live sessions. Inshallah, everyone is doing well. I hope that things are going well this long weekend. I hope it's treated you well. If you're in a state that it was a long weekend for you, then I hope that things are going well for you, inshallah. As you know, we were continuing with the discussion that we had with regards to the rulings of wudu and tayammum and ghusl. Last week, we discussed the rulings of tayammum a lot. We talked about wudu, we talked about in what situations do you need wudu, and we went through the rulings that had to do with touching these holy names that we're dealing with, basically, right? The name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the name of the prophets, the name of the imams, and the rulings that surrounded that whole issue, basically. So as we always do, I'll go through a quick review of what we discussed in the previous session, and then from there, inshallah, we'll move on to what we need to cover in today's session. Today's session, of course, will be mainly with regards to the rulings of ghusl, and there are a number of detailed rulings. And as I mentioned, we're not going to spend time just explaining how ghusl is done, although we'll do that very, very quickly. But these are rulings that are usually less known rulings that people usually aren't really aware of, or they're questions that sometimes a lot of people have. It's just difficult to find answers to them in the books, or usually they're not mentioned anywhere. So that's what we're going to be covering. There are more detailed rulings that you probably have questions about, but haven't really been covered anywhere. And a lot of them will make life a lot easier as well as we continue with them. So today's discussion, inshallah, will be mainly about ghusl. Like always, you guys can let us know about your comments in the comment section. Questions, if you have questions, you can just put them down in the comment section and we will get to them as soon as we have a chance to. Assalamu alaikum to the brothers and sisters who are with us. Very nice to have all of you guys with us as we go through today's session, inshallah. If you do have a question after the session, don't hesitate to inbox us and send a message to Mizan Institute's inbox page, or a message to Mizan Institute's Facebook page, I should say, and inshallah we'll get to that when we get a chance to. So, quick review of what we discussed in the previous session. We started talking about wudu. We covered wudu 2 sessions ago. We talked a little bit about some of the details. So one ruling that we did mention was this, that when it comes to doing wudu with regards to your intention, of course the intention of these ibadat that we do, the intention that we do, whether it's for namaz or ghusl, tayammum, wudu, all this kind of stuff, there isn't much to really worry about there. As long as you know what you're doing, that's your intention, and that's enough, basically. The only point that we did mention was that for Ayatollah Khamenei in particular, he does have this ruling that if you are going to do wudu now for something that its time has not even come yet, right? So like, for example, you might be doing wudu now for a namaz that the time of that namaz is going to start in 3 or 4 hours, right? Which is actually a very, I shouldn't say very, but a pretty common thing to do. Ayatollah Khamenei said you're not allowed to do that. You have to make wudu with the intention of taharat. And yes, with that wudu, with that intention, you can pray with that same wudu 4 or 5 hours later. You can do whatever you want if you do it with that intention. But you can't do it with the intention of, I'm doing wudu for Salatul Dhuhr 5 hours before Salatul Dhuhr. And there's this whole usuli discussion as to why that is the case and why you're not allowed to make an intention like that. And it's a long discussion, and I don't want to get into that right now. Basically, it has to do with, can you prepare for something when it hasn't even become wajib yet? So that's just a clue for those who might be interested in that discussion. But anyways, Ayatollah Sistani, on the other hand, doesn't have that condition. He says that if you're doing wudu, for whatever intention you're doing your wudu, you can do it You can do it for the intention of namaz, even if namaz is 5 or 6 hours later. Now, Ayatollah Khamenei, I must mention this, that if it's close to the time of namaz, he doesn't have a problem. So it's like 30 minutes, 45 minutes before namaz. That's not a problem. We also covered some of the mustahabbat of wudu, which I'm not going to go over again. There was a beautiful dua that we talked about that the brothers and sisters sent in the comment section in the previous recording. If anyone wants, they can take a look at that. We moved on to what things you can touch with wudu, and this is where the discussion got a little bit more detailed. So we said, obviously you can't touch the Quran, and when we're talking about the Quran, we're talking about the Arabic, obviously, not the translation. And we said that if it's something that has a plastic cover on it or things like that, then obviously you can touch it. And that's where we brought up the idea of smartphones, because these smartphones have everything in them. And we said that's obviously not going to be a problem. We said that for kids, it's not wajib for us to stop the kids from touching the Quran without wudu. But we just have to make sure that they're not disrespecting the Quran. So as long as a kid isn't, I don't know, playing soccer with the Quran or something like that, then that's fine. We don't have a responsibility beyond that. Moving on to, other than the Quran, what are the things that we are allowed to touch or are not allowed to touch without wudu? Ayatollah Sistani said, God's name in any language, according to Ihtiyat Wajib, you are not allowed to touch. And he also adds his special attributes. Now, as far as I looked, Ayatollah Khamenei did not have this addition that you cannot touch God's name in any language, right? So technically that means if you see the word God, based on Ayatollah Sistani's ruling, if you see the word God anywhere in a random text, right, you can't touch it. If you see the word God in Richard Dawkins' book as an atheist, you're not allowed to touch it without wudu, based on his ruling. But his ruling is ihtiyat wajib. As I mentioned, Ayatollah Khamenei, as far as I looked and searched, he doesn't have such a ruling. So that's with regards to God's name and his special attributes. These special attributes that we use for him, when I say special, I should probably use the word specific, in the sense that they're specifically used for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we say like Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Ar-Razzaq. These are things that we all know are specifically referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. We mentioned that if the word Allah is part of a name, you still have to observe wudu when you are touching it, because God is meant by that word. That was with regards to God's name, what we covered. Then we moved on to the Imams and the Prophets. We said, Ayatollah Khamenei has ihtiyat wajib, that you're not supposed to touch any name of the Ahlul Bayt. Ayatollah Sistani, however, says it's ihtiyat mustahab, and therefore you technically don't have to worry about that. So you can touch the Prophet's name without wudu, based on Ayatollah Sistani or Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling, if you're going to refer to Ayatollah Sistani, because he had an ihtiyat wajib. Then we moved on to how are we going to deal with these holy names. Like, you have certain piece of paper, it has verses of the Quran that have been accumulated, right? A lot of times you put them in a separate bag, asma muqaddasa, and how are you supposed to deal with these names? What we do know for a fact is that you can't do anything that the urf and the common view would consider it a means of disrespect, right? So that's why the Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Sistani, both of them say, hey, you can't burn anything. You can't burn these names, right? But anything outside of that, they really don't have a problem with it. If you want to put it in a river, that's fine. If you want to bury them, although that's not too practical, that's fine. If you want to change the words, that's fine. And the suggestion I gave last week was to just shred them, but that's, again, if someone feels like that's disrespect, then you shouldn't be doing that. But we said that this idea of, and this is a common thread in the principles of fiqh, that a lot of things are subjective, in the sense that a principle is presented to you, and then you have to use your mind and your understanding to figure out how this principle applies to your day-to-day life. Not every ruling in Islam is like that, right? But a lot of them are. So, for example, when it comes to this issue, you're not allowed to disrespect these names. I would say shredding them is not a form of disrespect. Someone might say they are, or it is. Then for them, it would not be allowed, and for me, it would be completely fine to do so. Moving on from that, we said that if it's a phrase or a word used in the Quran, if they quote that word or phrase somewhere else, then we also have to have wudu when we're touching it. Of course, if it's the Arabic that we are talking about. Okay, so we moved on from that. We said that wudu, jabira, and tayammum. I talked about this before multiple times. I don't want to talk about it again. Just very briefly, when it comes to cuts that you cannot wash, right? You have something covering it, or a broken bone that you have a cast on. Just to be safe, you're going to do wudu, jabira, and tayammum. You're going to do both of them, because in some cases you have to do wudu, jabira. In some cases you have to do tayammum. But if you want to just be on the safe side, you just do both, so that you don't do tayammum and then later on find out you had to do wudu jabira and your namaz would be batil because you basically prayed without wudu. So you would do both in the case of a cut or a broken bone or a boil or abscess that is difficult for you to deal with and you have something covering it. And then we moved on to the rulings that had to do with tayammum. We said that I'm going to go through these rulings that we had with regards to tayammum in just a second. Let me just check, see if we have any questions that have come in yet. Yes, okay, we do have a question. So let me just take a quick look at this question and then I'll continue inshallah with the review. Actually, let me just continue with the review. Once I'm done, I'll get to Sister Zainab's question in just a second. So with tayammum, we said that one of the main places you're supposed to do tayammum is when you don't have time to do wudu and ghusl. And we added, and this was something that was surprising even for me, that Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Sistani say that even if you're not sure, even if you have a doubt, like am I going to have enough time or am I not going to have enough time to do my wudu or ghusl, then you're supposed to do tayammum instead, which was interesting. We said, what can you do tayammum on? We said there's mainly dirt or things that come from the earth. Obviously, plants and leaves, metal, plastic, fabric. These are not things that we can do tayammum on. You can do tayammum on sand. You can do it on dirt. You can do it on stones, which is a very common thing that, you know, would be very accessible to us nowadays. So that's pretty much what we can do tayammum on. Yes, moving on, we talked about how you're supposed to do tayammum. So I'm going to explain this one more time because I know that as simple as it sounds, I think a lot of people actually don't know how to do tayammum. Okay, so with tayammum, what you want to do is you want to take your two palms, you're going to tap them twice on whatever it is that you had. Let's just say it was dirt that you had. Tap them twice, and then you're going to bring your palms up. And as you're bringing your palms up, don't have the intention of tayammum yet, because in tayammum, just like wudu, you're only supposed to go downwards, right? So it's as if you're washing your face basically. So when you're moving your hands upward, especially to remove your hair that's on your forehead, right, to position your palms on the top of your forehead, don't have the intention of tayammum when you're moving up. But when your palms get to the top, then you have the intention of tayammum and pull them down. You go to the right, go to the left, back in the middle, over the eyebrows, and the rest of the nose is just mustahab. You don't have to do that. Rest of the face is mustahab. You don't have to do that. When you're done with that, then keep your right hand still. You go from the wrist to the end of the fingers. Left hand, the same thing. And Ayatollah Khamenei had ihtiyat wajib, that you would tap again twice and do the hands, both hands, one more time. Okay, so that's basically how you would do tayammum. Tayammum should not be taking you more than like 20-30 seconds, honestly. If tayammum is taking more than 20-30 seconds, if it's taking 3 to 4 minutes to do tayammum, you're probably kathir shaykh. Okay, we'll get to that later on. And you guys know when I talk about this, it's in a very non-judgmental way because I've been there and I know what that feels like. But there was times growing up where I was thinking, is this really supposed to take this long, right? And in today, inshallah, when we talk about ghusl, we'll talk a lot more about the doubts that come up there, because ghusl is one of those things that people, you know, I've heard of people being in the shower for, you know, long minutes, taking very long. They have doubts upon doubts. So we'll talk about the doubts that come up with regards to ghusl and some of the ways to be able to deal with those doubts. All right. So that's a quick review of what we discussed in the previous session. Let me just check, see if we have any questions. Yes, Sister Zainab is asking, can we wear a locket with names of imams on it if we are not in the state of purity? Is it okay to keep wearing it while using a restroom? All of those things are okay as long as the locket, if the names of the imams are on it, and though the names of the imams are in contact with the skin, no. Well, forgive me, if it's the name of the imams, it would be okay. Why? Because according to Ayat al-Sistani, it is only ihtiyat mustahab to not touch the names of the imams without wudu, right? So if it's just the name of the imams, that's fine. But if it's the name of God, or it's the name, or it's verses of the Quran, like for example, let's say it's a wa in yakad, like verse that they put a lot of times, and that's in touch with our skin, in contact with our skin, then obviously that's a problem, because you wouldn't have wudu sometimes, or you would be in the state of janabat or anything of that nature. So that would be a problem. Going to the bathroom or not, this is, we don't have any specific ruling on this. I've had this, people have asked this question with regards to lockets or things they wear hanging from the neck, or rings, for example, sometimes, or none of this has specific rulings. It all has to do with whether the common view would consider it to be disrespectful to do so. And as far as I know, no one considers it a form of disrespect if you're wearing that thing and you walk into a bathroom. Is it better not to do it? Yeah, I mean, it's better not to do it if you want to like maybe take it off. It's always better to be cautious and stuff like that. But what we're talking about here is halal and haram. So when we talk about halal and haram, is it haram to, have that, the locket on or that kind of stuff when you're going to the bathroom? No, because no one sits there and says, oh, look, this person is disrespecting the Ahlul Bayt. He walked into the bathroom with that thing on, while he was wearing it. Okay, Sister Mehnaz is asking, for tayammum, do we use fingers or palm, or it doesn't matter? As far as I know, they say basically it's your palms, but if you want to just be on the safe side, you can do palms and the fingers, right? It'll actually technically be very difficult to do all of it only with your palms, but use both, if that makes sense. So let me know, Sister Mehnaz, if that answered your question. Hopefully that clarifies things. Yeah, so she's asking, while going down on the face, I didn't see the part in the parentheses, while going down on face and for going over hands. Yeah, they just say basically the kaf, right? In the Arabic, that's what they refer to, which is the inside of your hand. So it doesn't have to just be your palms or your fingers, it's just both, right? There's no specific differentiation there, or they don't distinguish between the two, as far as I know. All right, let's dive right into ghusl. Okay, first question. When does it become necessary to perform ghusl? What are the times that we perform ghusl? I'm not going to go into detail here. Mainly, we are talking about, one is the issue of janabat, which we won't be discussing in today's session. Maybe later on we'll have a separate session to discuss that. The three types of situations where the sisters have to perform ghusl, and the other one is mass mayyit, when someone touches the body of a mayyit that has not had ghusl performed on it. And the fourth, of course, is the mayyit itself, which is ghusl mayyit, right? So we're not going to get into any of these in particular. What we want to talk about right now is just ghusl itself. I do want to cover just a couple of things, because these are things that we deal with more often before I start discussing ghusl itself. And that is the idea of being junub. What leads to the state of janabat, we're not going to get into that, but what are the things that become haram for someone who is junub? That's what I want to cover very quickly. Number one, touching the verses of the Quran. And this is even if you have wudu, right? Because at that point, janabat is a state in which it cannot be removed unless someone performs ghusl. And we'll talk in just quite a bit if someone didn't know and they didn't do their ghusl and then they prayed for 20 years, and what are they supposed to do after that? Do they have to make up for it? Do they not have to make up for it? We'll get to that in just a second. But touching the Quran, touching God's name, entering Masjid al-Haram, stopping in a masjid or entering to pick up something from a masjid, or reciting verses of the Quran that have sajda in them. And then there are a bunch of things that are makruh. Eating and drinking before someone performs their ghusl is makruh. Intimacy before they've done their ghusl is makruh. Sleeping before they've done their ghusl is makruh. Having a Quran with you, reciting more than 7 verses of the Quran, all of these are things that are makruh while someone is in the state of janabat. Okay, moving on. So ghusl itself, what are we talking about when we talk about ghusl? Ghusl, there's basically 2 types. The same way we had 2 types with wudu. We said there's tartibi and there's irtimasi, or there's normal wudu and then there's irtimasi wudu. Similarly, there is normal ghusl, which is like, the default ghusl that we've heard of up until now, which goes step by step. That's what differentiates it from irtimasi ghusl. And then there's a ghusl where you basically wash all of the parts that you're supposed to wash all at once. Now, we'll get into that in just a second. Let's leave that aside. First point that we have to cover is this. When it comes to your normal ghusl, which we would call tartibi ghusl, for Ayatollah Sistani, he does not have a differentiation between the right side of the body and the left side of the body. And this is very important, and it makes a huge difference sometimes, and I'll explain why. So for Ayatollah Sistani, he says if you just wash your head and you wash your neck and then you wash the rest of your body, that's enough. You don't have to go right side first and left side second. Okay. Why is that important? Because later on, if you find out that you skipped a part, like for example, let's say you did your ghusl and then later on you found out that there was a barrier somewhere on your skin, right? Or you just forgot to wash a certain part of your body. All you have to do later on is just wash that part of the body. You don't have to do ghusl all over again. So now there's some explanation here. Bear with us because there's some details to this discussion, to this ruling. But the overall idea is that because there are no sides, if you skipped a part and you messed up on a part, you don't have to go and redo it all over again. If it has to do with your body, yes, if it has to do with the head and the neck, he says that you would have to go back and redo it, right? Because you can't wash your body unless your head and neck is washed properly, and then you move on to your body. But on the body, he doesn't differentiate between the right and the left side. Ayatollah Khamenei, on the other hand, no, he does differentiate between the right and left side. So that means that you would do the right side first, and then you would do the left side first, right? And you don't have to like draw a straight line and be like, I did the right side, and is this the right side? Is this the left side? You just go over to the left side a little bit when you're doing the right side. You go out to the right side when you're doing the left side. And just do a little bit extra so that you don't have to think about. These are tips for people who feel like they might be Kathir Shaykh, and they sit down and they obsess over some of these details, right? You'll be hearing more of them as we continue. So for Ayatollah Khamenei, because he does have this order between the right side and the left side of his body, he says if you messed up, let's say on your right side of your body, then technically the left side was also invalid. So then you would technically have to go back into the shower and do your right side and then the left side, right? So this is where it makes a difference. But for Ayatollah Sistani, who didn't have an order between the right side and the left side, he would say, hey, you missed just like one part. Let's say you had a nail polish on for inside the house for your spouse. Okay, so just go remove that nail polish and just wash that part. You don't have to go back in the shower, right? Just pour a little bit of water on your nail and that's it. Now you've done your ghusl. Okay, so that's the first ruling that I wanted to cover. Just checking to see in case we have any questions coming in. No. Okay, so that's ruling number 1. Moving on, question that comes up over and over again is, do I have to make up for prayers if I didn't know about ghusl? If I didn't know that I was supposed to do ghusl, and this comes up with regards to prayers, and it comes up with regards to fasts as well, right? It also comes up with regards to Hajj, but usually when people want to go for Hajj, they're taught about these issues, so it's not something that's that common as much as it is when it comes to praying and fasting. So what's the ruling there? Obviously, if someone didn't do it on purpose, well, obviously then, yeah, you have to make up for everything. There's no doubt about that. But what if I didn't know about the ruling? That's what we're talking about here. So, Ayatollah Khamenei says, for your salat, even if you were not at fault, there's Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling, says even if you were not at fault, you still have to go back and make up for all of your prayers that you missed. So, scenario, I was growing up in a family where they didn't tell me about this stuff, and I ended up having to, I ended up praying for 5 years without doing my ghusl. Now, what am I supposed to do? Ayatollah Khamenei says, for your salat, yes, you would have to go back and redo it, right? Also for, when it comes to fasts, the fasts that I did, do I have to redo those fasts? It's a little detailed. For the most part, he says that, yes, you would have to make up for those as well. This is Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling. Ayatollah Sistani's ruling is pretty much the same thing. He says, yes, for your salat, you would have to make up for it. For your fast, he says, if you didn't know about the ruling and it wasn't your fault, you were jahil qasir, as they say, you didn't have any shortcoming in learning the rulings, it's just that you never knew that such a thing exists, then you don't have to make up for your fast. Otherwise, you would have to make up for your fast. But for the namaz, he says that it is necessary to do basically redo all of your salats. So someone who wants to redo their salats, because I know this inevitably this is going to be asked, what if I have 5 years of salat? How am I supposed to do it? Well, when they say you have to make up for salat, doesn't mean you have to make up for all 5 years now. You start, and God forbid if someone leaves the world before they're done, that's fine because they started with their prayers. So that's not a problem. Okay. So that's the ruling when it comes to whether, if I didn't know about the ruling of fasting, then what am I supposed to do in that situation? Okay. Sister Safinas is asking, but is it not mustahab to divide the body into right and left according to Ayatollah Supreme Marja, Ayatollah Sayyid Sistani? I'm not sure, honestly. It might be. So we can check on that, inshallah. I'm not sure, honestly, Sister Safina, so I don't know. I was so mesmerized by the fact that he doesn't consider it wajib that I forgot to look into whether he considers it mustahab or not. It's very much possible that he does consider that mustahab. Okay. Another ruling that comes up here quite often is this, that mostly this would apply to our sisters, but partially also to the brothers as well, and that is the hair, right? If someone has long hair, do they have to make sure that all of their hair is washed and there's water running through all of their hair? Turns out that that is not even necessary. What is necessary is the skull and the skin itself. So this is a little different from wudu, because in wudu they used to say, for example, for the brothers for facial hair, they used to say if it's a lot, you just wash the facial hair, you don't have to wash the skin. Whereas with wudu, with ghusl, they say no, you have to wash the skin. Similarly here, they would say that you would have to wash the skull, basically, or the skin of the head, not necessarily the long hair. Okay. Moving on to the conditions of ghusl. So I'm going to do my head and neck, then I'm going to do my body. If I'm Ayatollah Khamenei, then I'm going to make a point. If I'm a follower of Ayatollah Khamenei, I'm going to make a point to do the right side of my body first and then the left side of my body. Are there any conditions? The conditions are all the same conditions that we had in wudu, except for 3. There are 3 conditions that you don't really have to pay attention to, okay? Well, I should say 2 that you don't have to pay attention to, 1 that is a little bit more difficult than wudu. So number 1 is that in ghusl, you don't have to go downwards. Tayammum and wudu, we said you have to go downwards. With ghusl, you don't have to go downwards. You can go any which way that you like. And number 2 is that there is no muwalat in ghusl, which goes back to the point that we were explaining before, that if I started ghusl and I skipped a part, I can wash that part let's just go with an example that has to do with the left side of my body. If I forgot to wash my foot on the left side of my body, then I can finish up my ghusl 2 hours later, right? It's not like wudu. Wudu, you have to do it then. You can't do half of wudu now and the other half like 2 hours later. Okay, now, when there's a discussion about there being timing between doing different parts of ghusl, one question that comes up is, what if I do something? And this has regardless of whether you're putting a lot of gap between the different parts of ghusl or no, you're just doing it in the matter of like a couple minutes. Regardless, this question comes up. What if I do something that would normally break my wudu while I'm doing my ghusl? So in the middle of ghusl, I do something like that. The answer is that it won't break your ghusl. Your ghusl will still be correct, but you would have to do wudu for the things that you would normally need wudu for. So basically, your ghusl would not make up for wudu, but your ghusl would still be complete. It's just better to start all over again. But nonetheless, that is the ruling with regards to that. So the conditions of ghusl, very similar to the conditions of wudu. Like we said, you can go any way that you like, and there's no muwalat. You can put a gap between whatever part of ghusl it is that you need to do. All right. Another very important ruling that comes up here has to do with this. Does my body need to be tahir when I am performing ghusl? Right? According to Ayatollah Khamenei, he says, yes, every part of your body, before you get to doing ghusl of that part of the body, you have to wash it. So that means that, like, for example, if my right side of my body is najis, I have blood on my right hand, I can wash my head and my neck, but when it comes to the right side of my body, I can't just start my ghusl and know that in the process of my ghusl, my hand is also going to be washed. He says that's batil. He says you have to wash your hand and then make the intention that, okay, now I'm going to wash the right side of my body. For Ayatollah Sistani, however, he doesn't have that ruling. So he says, even if you know a part of your body is najis, you can just do your ghusl knowing, as long as you're using tap water and as long as you're using kur water, not if you're using qalil water, as long as you know that you're going to go under this tap water, if this is a shower or whatever the case may be, and in the process your hand is going to become tahir and you're going to do ghusl at the same time, no problem. You don't have to worry about any of that. This is important a lot of times, not intentionally, but sometimes when you find out later on that your body might have been najis, for example, then it helps a lot of times in those situations. Okay. Just checking to see if we have any questions coming in. No. So we'll continue, inshallah. Moving on to the next question. Can I do one ghusl for multiple purposes? The answer is yes. According to both of these maraji, when you want to do ghusl, even if there's multiple reasons for you doing ghusl, you can do one ghusl for both of them, or multiple ones, even if it's like 3 or 4, whatever the case may be. You can just do one ghusl with the intention that you're doing ghusl for all of those purposes. Does ghusl make up for my wudu? Can I do ghusl instead of wudu? Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Sistani's rulings here are slightly different. So Ayatollah Khamenei says, if it's a wajib ghusl, one of those 4 things that we discussed above, he says, then yes, you can do that. However, if it's a mustahab ghusl, he says, no, you can't do that, Ayatollah Khamenei. Ayatollah Sistani's ruling here is broader. He says that as long as it's a mustahab ghusl and it has been established that this ghusl is actually mustahab, then you can do it. But you have to make sure that it's actually considered mustahab according to Ayatollah Sistani. So that's why in his book, when he mentions this, then he has a discussion on which of the ghusl are there that are actually considered mustahab. Why is this important? Because if they're actually considered mustahab, that's when you can use them instead of wudu. If they're not actually considered mustahab, it's not proven to him that these are actually mustahab, then you cannot use that ghusl for wudu. So he mentions a number of them. There's probably 25 different ones that he mentions. Out of the 25, 10, 15 of them have to do with different parts of Hajj. so they won't really apply to us. But yes, there's like a ghusl for Eid al-Fitr, there's ghusl for Eid al-Qurban, and of course there's ghusl for the day of Jum'ah, right? So that's the one I just want to focus on just a little bit before we move on. And the important point that I want to mention here is we know that ghusl Jum'ah has a lot of thawab and all that stuff. But what if you don't get a chance to do it before the noon of Jum'ah? He says that you can still do it without the intention of ada or qada until Maghrib. And if you can't do that, then during the day of Saturday, you can even do it. So if in case someone isn't able to do it on Friday, then they can, if they forgot, for example, or they didn't have a chance to, they can do it on Saturday as well. Okay. When we're doing ghusl, what parts of the body do we have to wash? Do we have to wash the inner parts of the body? Do I have to wash inside of the ears, inside of the nose, that kind of stuff, or no? So Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Sistani, both of them say that as long as it's something that would be considered the zahir, the apparent parts of your body, those are the parts that you would have to wash, right? The other parts are not necessary to wash. He does say, however, that if you have a doubt whether a certain part is considered batin or zahir, you would have to wash that part of your body. So he does mention that. All right, so before I continue, we have a question from Brother Hussein. Brother Hussein is asking, does Jum'ah ghusl done after Dhuhr make up for wudu? And what about for when it's a qada Jum'ah ghusl? Does it make up for wudu? So if you follow Ayatollah Sistani, the answer to that would be yes. It would make up for wudu. And what you mean by a qada Jum'ah ghusl is that like you did it after Friday, right? Not during Friday, but after Friday. Then yes, because he does say, right? He says it's mustahab to do it. Yeah, so it's still mustahab. Anything he says is mustahab is going to be considered similar to a wajib ghusl for him. So that would be the ruling with regards to that question. Okay, moving on, I'm going to mention just a couple of the mustahabbat of ghusl. If anyone has any questions, they can send them in, because inshallah we will be wrapping up in just about 10 minutes. The mustahabbat of ghusl, Ayatollah Sistani has mentioned some of these, and from this I want to make a segue, or yeah, I guess they call it a segue. I want to make my way into the discussion with regards to people who have a lot of doubt. So some of the mustahabbat that are mentioned for ghusl is that when you're washing, it's mustahab that you only wash downwards. That's one thing that's mustahab. Another thing that's mustahab is that you mention the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another thing that's mustahab, and this is the third one, is that there are certain du'as to be mentioned. And the fourth one is that your ghusl, all of it together, doesn't take up more than 3 liters of water. Okay, now if you're wondering what 3 liters of water is, that's not even a gallon of water, right? So if you guys, I don't know if you guys buy milk in half a gallon boxes or a full gallon, but you know the full gallons are the big ones. Not even that amount. Okay, so this is where I want to talk a little bit about the kathir shak situation. And people who stay in the shower for 10, 15, 20 minutes because they want to do ghusl. Ghusl, based on these rulings that, you know, the maraji have mentioned, should not be taking us more than, I don't know, 2-3 minutes. That should be it. And if you look at what not only is the you know, the Ahlul Bayt telling us that this amount is enough to perform ghusl, they're saying it's mustahab to do your ghusl with this little of an amount of water. Like if this wasn't in the book of Ayatollah Sistani and in the book and in our ahadith, we probably would sit there and say, no, there's no way. This is too extreme. We'd never be able to do ghusl with that amount of water. So having understood that, then when it comes to doing the ghusl that we want to do, brothers and sisters, we have to be aware that this ghusl that we are doing, if it's taking more than 2 or 3 minutes, we're doing something wrong. And if you go on the website of Ayatollah Sistani, left and right, he will tell you that if you're having multiple doubts, and we talked about this in the previous session, that there is no particular criterion to tell you whether you're kathir shak or not, as long as you're having many doubts, so much so that in the common view, people would say you are having extra doubts, you are having more doubts than a normal person would have, then you're automatically kathir shak. And when you're kathir shak, you are not supposed to pay attention to your doubts from that point on. I even read in some of the rulings that sometimes when things get serious, it's haram for you to pay attention to some of these doubts as well. So if you know someone who's dealing with a situation like this, where they go into the shower and you know that they're taking forever, right, to perform a ghusl, right? And there might be situations where they come and they tell you about this. One thing that you can tell them is that realistically, if you think about it, during the time of the Prophet, when the Muslims were in the middle of the desert, right, and water was like gold, do you really think the Prophet was expecting Arabs at that time to take tons and tons of water and to make sure that every little dot of their body was washed, and for them to obsess over it? Or do you think that the Prophet would have told them, oh yeah, wash your head and your neck and then wash your body, and they would have just done that? They wouldn't have put in a microscope to see if the water got to every single part of their body or not, right? If we think a little bit more realistic about this issue, then this can really help us in terms of staying away from these doubts. And this goes for wudu as well. Like people say, I remember I had this question, people say, oh, when I pour wudu, how can I make sure water is getting to every part of my hand? Well, water is gonna get to every part of your hand. Are these questions that the companions of the Prophet would come to him and say, Ya Rasulullah, when you said wash your head, how can I know for sure that my head is washed properly? Or how can I know for sure? They didn't even have showers back then, right? For all we know, they probably used like 1/10 of the water that we are using today. So if this is just one of those things that can help someone if they're struggling with something like this, it can help them to be able to combat this in their own mind. And there's different things, honestly, that helps different people. Like sometimes it's a specific point that you explain to someone that really clicks for them. They're like, oh, okay, so this is how I'm supposed to do things. What we do know for sure is the Prophet and the people at that time could not have done ghusl in the detailed way that some of us are obsessing about it when we're having so many doubts. That's number one. And number two, that these maraji are all telling us that if you have this many doubts, and again, I want to emphasize on this, it's not that, you are having so many doubts that your life is paralyzed. No, if you're having more doubts than the common person, you are kathir shak. And when you're kathir shak, that's it. You don't pay attention to your doubts anymore. And then, brothers and sisters, there's a second level to becoming kathir shak, and I'll share this with you guys because I don't think this topic of kathir shak is going to come up anywhere else. The second level of kathir shak is this, that there are situations where someone starts having so many doubts over and over again that they no longer have doubts about whether they are applying the principle and the ruling to a certain situation. Like they don't have doubts about, am I washing my body correctly, or did I do my wudu correctly, and that kind of stuff. They start having doubts when it comes to the rulings itself. So what does that mean? You'll see all of a sudden this person, he has 35 different questions about wudu. He has 45 different questions about ghusl. Oh, when I do ghusl like this, is that okay? If I do it like that, is that okay? If it's like this, is this okay? And they start really getting into thinking about it like as if it's like mathematics all of a sudden, right? Or it's philosophy all of a sudden, where they start dissecting every part of it. And this is a second level, and many people might not actually be able to relate to this, but those who are dealing with it know what I'm talking about. There's a second level where you just start asking so many questions because this sense of having so many doubts has trickle down to the rulings themselves. So things that people normally do without having to worry too much about the ruling, you every step of the way you're worried. Is this allowed? Is this not allowed? Can I do this? Can I not do this? And that's something that also basically makes life very difficult. So if anyone knows anyone like this, please reach out to them and ask them to get help and ask of the rulings as soon as possible, because that's something that will only, unfortunately, it will only grow from a certain point onwards. It's only going to get worse afterwards. So that's all we had to cover with regards to ghusl. Inshallah, next week we're going to move on to salat and the rulings that we have with regards to salat. As I mentioned in the previous sessions, we will be doing, as we're going through the different parts of salat, we'll talk a little bit about asrar as-salat, just a little bit, just touching on it a little bit. And I mentioned this before as well, that if we take this and we explain this to our children as well, so that they understand the different parts of salat, why it's there, and how does the symbols in salat relate to the meaning that we have in mind, I think that really helps our children connect with salat. So we'll be going through the rulings of salat. Salat is something that has a bunch of rulings, a bunch of questions people have, and we will dissect those questions as we move forward, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, we had another very successful course held in Austin this time through Mizan Institute, and Shaykh Amin was there just this last weekend, alhamdulillah. If anyone is interested in holding courses in their own city, then you guys can reach out to us, and inshallah we can plan to set that up as well. I'm not sure, actually I'm not 100% sure if Shaykh Amin has a session for tomorrow or not. I can't remember exactly what the schedule looks like, but if you're interested, you can take a look at the Facebook page, and you will see if we have a session set up. If there is a session, it'll be tomorrow at 7 p.m. Inshallah. All right, thank you very much. We will see you in the next session. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.